Well, hello. My name is Jim Kesselring. I'm a pastor here in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. And this is a study of Genesis chapter 1 to 11. Now, Genesis 1 to 11 is part of the book of Genesis, which is part of what we call the Pentateuch, which includes Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And these books really formed what might be called the constitution of the Jewish nation. You'll remember that God chose the Jewish people to reveal himself to. And it was out of those people that the Messiah, Jesus, was born, who is our Savior and our Lord. Some people say, how odd of God to choose the Jews. And really that's so, because the Jewish people weren't any better than anybody else, but God chose them. Out of his grace, his undeserved mercy towards them, he chose them to reveal himself to and to make covenants with. And some of the big names of these early Jewish people were Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Moses. You're familiar with all of these. And God, there was a history involved in them receiving God's covenant and moving on to the next generation. But initially, God called Abraham. And that's what we read in Genesis chapter 12. But our study is going to begin in Genesis chapter 1. So we're looking at the beginning of the book of Genesis. So a long-standing tradition is that it is Moses who is the author of the Pentateuch and therefore of Genesis. Of course, if this is the case, he's the human author because the divine author is God himself. And the question that could be raised is, how did this divine author, God, communicate his inspired words to the human author, if it were, in fact, Moses? Well, what we know is that God communicates with human beings in different ways. In Old Testament times, we read that God communicated with Joseph through dreams. Sometimes God communicates through visitations, like with Moses, the burning bush, okay? And sometimes through other people. If you look at Luke's gospel, for example, we can see Luke at the very beginning says that he went and looked at other inspired sources. And Paul, the Apostle Paul, was one of his. So maybe that's another way that God speaks. And still another way that God can speak to people is through the oral histories of nations, and in particular, the Israelite nation. And that makes a lot of sense. Because before there was a written Pentateuch, if you like, we can imagine these desert living Israelites sitting around campfires and telling stories about God, and it would go down from one generation to another. So there would be oral history, and they would be passed on from one generation to another. So this is still another way in which God can communicate to people. God can communicate different ways. The book of Genesis covers two distinct time periods. The first is from the beginning until Abraham, and the second is from Abraham to Joseph. Well, the second part, Abraham to Joseph, that's a few hundred years. The first part, from the beginning and to Abraham, we really don't know. We don't really know how long a period that was. Thousands or thousands upon 1,000 years. We just simply do not know what is recorded there in the first 11 chapters of Genesis. A main point of discussion revolves around the question as to how Genesis is to be understood. Are we to take what we read there literally? For example, there are 7 days. Okay, that's what we read in the first chapter. Is that 7 literal days? Or some people think that it is 7 time spans. And then some people say, well, the author of Genesis, chapter 1, is using this idea of 7 days as a framework in order to share what he wants to present about creation. And the reality is that each approach that you use towards understanding Genesis, and in particular his chapter 1, solves problems but also creates problems. For example, if it's just literally like we read it, then light was created before the sun was created. Well, how did that be? And if we just read it like it is, we ask questions like, well, who did Cain marry? Because there doesn't seem to be any women involved. So there are these difficult questions that are raised when you read Genesis chapter 1, no matter which direction you read it in the kind of literature. This we know about Genesis chapter 1 to 11. It is not history as we know it. It is history in a sense, and it's linear, and there's a progression. But it's not like what we would call modern day history, where we want to understand exactly how everything takes place. Because the intention of the author of Genesis chapter 1 is not initially to communicate history. And it is not a scientific explanation of human origins. In every case it says, and God said. But it's not science. It's not trying to communicate the scientific way in which God may have created things. It does not attempt to explain how God brought creation into being. So once again, this sort of relates to what I just said a moment ago. The emphasis isn't on the how of creation. It's rather on God being the creator. Okay, because in every case it says, and God said, so God is the creator. Its intention is essentially theological. Theological truths are being communicated. Important theological truths are being communicated in this first chapter. Some people have called it a theological narrative. I like that. It's a narrative. It talks about people, and it goes through as a narrative would, but its basic intention is theological. And the theological truths communicated to us through the first chapter, well, through Genesis, the first 11 chapters are multitudinous. They include that God is the creator of all that has been created, that he is spirit, that he is an eternal being, and that he is superior to the created order, which makes sense. If he created it, then he's superior to it. His creation demonstrates his power, glory, and love. Man stands at the apex of the created order, the top of the created order. That's where mankind, male and female, stand. God's creation was marred by human sin. That's a point that's made. And God wants to have relationship with people. That also is a truth that's communicated. God could have abandoned God because he had sinned against him, but he didn't. We find that in Genesis chapter 1 to 11. And the world that God created is complex, marked by great diversity, yet stable and dependable. So all of these spiritual truths are communicated. We're going to repeat them again as they come up, but just to give you an oversight of the great theological truths that are communicated in this theological narrative that we call Genesis 1 to 11. So let's get started. It says, in the beginning, Genesis chapter 1 and verse 1. And in the beginning means before time. God created. The word God is used 30 times. God, in a sense, is the hero of the whole Bible, and he certainly is the hero of the first chapter. He is the actor, the main actor in Genesis chapter 1. He created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the world, the waters. So the heavens of the earth refers to the universe. So God created the universe, but then he shaped it. He shaped it in a way that suited him, but also was appropriate for mankind to live on it and to be stewards of it. And that's what we read in the next verses. God spoke, and there was light. And God said, let there be light. And there was light. God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. So this is the first day of creation. And you notice how it proceeds. First, there was evening, and then there was morning. Probably two reasons. When the world was created, there was darkness first. So the darkness came, and then light came. So there was darkness, and then there was light. Secondly, don't forget that this is written to an Israelite community, and the Israelite community saw the day beginning at 6 p.m. and going to 6 p.m. the next day. So therefore, this accommodates their sense of what it means for a day. A day begins at 6 p.m. and ends at 6 p.m. the next day. Verse 6, and God said, let there be an expanse between the waters to separate water from water. So God made the expanse and separate the water under the expanse from the water above it. And it was so. God called the expanse sky, and there was evening and there was morning the second day. So the second day, God created the sky. The third day, God began to organize the earth for habitation. He created dry ground, called land, and the water on the earth, called seas. And he pronounced it as good. We read it in verse 9. It says, and God said, let the water under the sky be gathered to one place, and let the dry ground appear. And so it was so. God called the dry ground land, and gathered the waters he called seas, and saw that it was good. So now on earth there is dry ground, earth, and there's water called seas. And when God did that, he said it was good. The fourth day, God spoke, let there be lights in the sky, and God created the sun, moon, and the stars. We read that in verse 14 to 19. And God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them serve as signs to mark seasons and days and years. And let them be lights in the expanse of the sky to give light on the earth. And it was so. God made two great lights, the greater light to govern the day, that would be the sun, and the lesser light to govern the night, which of course is the moon. He also made the stars. God set them in the expanse of the sky to give light on the earth, to govern the day and the night, to separate light from darkness. And God saw that it was good. Everything he does is good. And there was evening and there was morning, the fourth day. The fifth day, God spoke and created birds to fly and fill the sky over the earth, and creatures of the sea of every kind to fill the water of the seas on the earth. His directive to these created beings was to be fruitful and to increase in number. We read about that in verses 20 to 23. And God said, "Let the water teem with living creatures, and let the birds fly above the earth across the expanse of the sky." Birds are for the sky. They fly. So God created the great creatures of the sea, fish and everything else that's a part of sea life, and we know how diverse that is. And every living and moving thing with the water teems according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. God creates, he creates with great diversity. The bird life, if I can call it that, and also the sea life, the animals that live in the sea. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them and said, "Be fruitful and increase in number, and fill the waters in the sea, and let the birds increase on the earth." And there was evening and there was morning, the fifth day. Okay, you animals, copulate and increase in number. On the sixth day, God spoke and created a great variety of animals, livestock, useful to man, and wild animals. We read that in verses 24 and 25. And God said, "Let the land produce living creatures according to their kinds, livestock, creatures that move among the ground, and wild animals, each according to its kind." And it was so. God made the wild animals according to their kinds, and livestock according to their kinds, and all the creatures that move along the ground according to their kinds. So you have these animals that we use, that we can domesticate, and they're helpful to us. At the same time, they're also wild animals, and this is what God is creating at this time. And God saw that it was good. And now God comes to the apex of his creation, still on the sixth day. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, in our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, and over livestock, over all the earth, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. We are created beings. God is the creator, and we are creatures. He created us male and female. Males for females, females for males. He's going to get to that point more in the next chapter. And he created us in his image. What does that mean? Well, a lot of debate has gone into answering that question. And obviously, one part of the answer is that we are superior to animal life in terms of our intelligence. There are some very intelligent animals. But that being so, generally, people, male and females, are more intelligent than animals. But definitely, the fact that we are made in the image of God goes beyond that. It must include also the fact that we have a part of us that is like God. Spirit. Now, what we know is that God is a spirit being. We're not spirit beings, but we do have spirit. There's a part of us that is spirit. We are body, soul, and spirit. And because we have spirit, then we have the opportunity to be in relationship with God, like no other part of the created order can be. Now, there may be more to it than that, but there is at least that much. And then we're told that the creation of the lower order, plant and animal, is by God, but he has given mankind dominion over it. And this would involve responsibility to care for it and permission to use it for our blessing. He says this in verses 28 to, and we read, God blessed them, male and female, and said to them, be fruitful and increase in number, and fill the earth, and subdue it. Rule over the fish of the sea, and the birds of the air, over every living creature that moves on the ground. So we image bearers have a twofold mission. We are to be fruitful, and we're to be to increase in number. We're to fill the earth. And also we are to be stewards of the earth. This is what it says. Rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air. We're to have dominion over them. It goes on to say in verse 29, then God said, I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food. And to all the beasts of the earth, and all the birds of the air, and all the creatures that move on the ground, everything that has the breath of life in it, I give every green plant for food. And it was so. This earth is for us. God has given it to us, not to abuse, but to take care of and to meet our needs. Part of our needs is that we need to eat. And so God has given that which is a part of the earth to us that we can use for food. And we're to use it wisely. We're to be stewards. It's God's. God created it. So it's his. It belongs to him, but we're in the position where we have authority and responsibility. Authority over it, but responsibility to use it wisely. And it says in verse 31, God saw all that he had made, and it was good. No, he didn't say that. What he said was, it was very good, very good. And there was evening and there was morning, the sixth day. God looks at his created order, if we can talk like that, and he says, this is very good. God blessed it, and he made the seventh day holy. We're told that it is set apart to be a day of rest. It says, the heavens and the earth, this is chapter 2, verse 1, the heavens and the earth were completed in all their vast array. The seventh day God had finished the work he had been doing. So on the seventh day he rested from his work, and God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done. And when it says that he rested, it doesn't mean that he was tired or worn out. It just means he rested because his work was complete. His work was complete. So God is the creator and the sustainer of the world. And the Israelites, when they honored the Sabbath day, that's what they remembered. Okay, this was an important day for the nation of Israel, to not work on the Sabbath, the seventh day. Why? Because on that day it was holy. Holy means to be set apart. It was set apart to God. It was set apart to remember that God was the creator and that he is the sustainer of all things. In chapter 1, very definitely makes this point that he is the creator of all things. Well, it communicates a lot of things to us, and so let's look at the takeaways that we find in chapter 1. Genesis chapter 1 to 11 communicates truths that go deeper than concrete language can express, and therefore uses other forms of communication, symbolism, stories, and poetry. When you're communicating, you can use just simple explanations of things, but there are other ways of communicating that make it go deeper. For example, if you wanted to talk about the atrocities of World War II, you could say, oh yes, the Jews were persecuted and they were put in concentration camps, and people were very fearful that they would be rounded up and taken off. That's one way to communicate it. Another way to communicate it would be to give them the Diary of Anne Frank. And quite honestly, if they read the Diary of Anne Frank, they'd get a much greater appreciation and understanding of what it meant to be a Jew during that time. Similarly, if I were to write a love letter to my wife and I were to say, I love you, that would be good. But I could also say something like, my heart beats 1,000 times every time I come near you. Well, which is a better way to speak? You could go either way, but definitely the second way would communicate something that the first way, the very straight out words, I love you, would not communicate. And my wife, if I said my heart beats 1,000 times a minute when I'm near you, she wouldn't say, oh, Jim has a heart problem. She would understand how deeply I felt when I was near her. Well, so also Genesis chapter 1 to 11. We've only gone into Genesis chapter 1 so far, but we've also seen that there is a way of speaking here that isn't just a common way, a common narrative. There are different things being said here, and so we need to understand that as we go through these first 11 chapters, we're going to see a different way of speaking to communicate truth. Secondly, the objective of Genesis 1 to 11 is not history or science. That's not what the author of Genesis 1 to 11 is about, trying to tell us the history before Abraham or the science of how things came to be before Abraham. It's theology. The emphasis is on theology. Thirdly, Genesis chapter 1 is not concerned with the process of creation, but with the origin of creation. The world is not the product of blind chance and probability. God created it. It's not one atom hitting against another atom and rocks being formed and then trees and then finally animals and then finally human beings. No. God created what is. Whatever is, it's here because God created it. Fourthly, that God created it means that he is not a part of the created order and that he stands above it. His being is non-material. We call that spirit. And he is non-created himself and eternal. So God is not a part of the created order itself. He stands above the created order. The created order is essentially material, and God is not material. He is spirit. God is a spirit being. One of the great verses of the New Testament says, God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth. So God is a spirit being, and he is eternal. He is uncreated, which is different than the earth, and he stands above the created order, the earth and ourselves. Fifth, the world that God created was good. God didn't make any mistakes when he created what he created. It was good. The apex of creation is man, male and female, people. People are the high point of God's creation. God is relational. He made man in his own image with the ability to have a relationship with him. No other part of the created order can have a relationship with God, but people can. People can. And it was through our Lord Jesus Christ that we sinners, and we're going to get to that in further along when we find that we are sinners, that's what chapter 2 tells us, redeemed us so that we can have a right relationship with God. Again, God is spirit, we have spirit, and therefore we human beings can have a relationship with God. 8, mankind is to use that which was created for his needs and is to be responsible steward for the created order. We stand at the top of the created order, and God has given us permission, and he wants us to use the created order to meet our needs. But we're not to abuse the created order. We're to be good stewards. We're to manage it well. And lastly, a fundamental, important truth to live by is this. God is the creator, and we are creatures. That's simple, but it's true, and it's fundamental. And if you live with that basis of truth, that God is the creator and we're creatures, then that implies that we are made for God and God is not made for us. So our lives then should be always asking the question, God, what do you want of me? What should I do? What should I be? Because I'm your creature. And the interesting thing is that if we set ourselves aside and not me, and ask that question, God, what do you want me to be? What do you want me to do? Our lives are going to be the best possible lives. They're going to be purposeful, meaningful, joyful. Really, we're going to have the best kind of lives that are possible to have. It's the best way to live. God, you're the creator, and I'm the creature. Well, we'll see you next time to talk about chapter 2. If ever you want to get in contact with me, or if you want notes on this first chapter, then please email me. My email is kesselringjc@gmail.com. That's Kesselring, KESSELRING, JC@gmail.com. If you email me, I would be glad to answer any questions that you have. And I would also be glad to send you notes for this session. So until next time, God be with you.